Hey, it's Joe, and I got a lot more clarity recently. I haven't made a video in a pretty long time, but I just made one video on INTJs recently. But I want to explain today ESTJs versus ESFJs, and then I want to contrast. After we understand the difference between those two, I want to contrast what happens when you change the S for an N. So then you would have the ENTJs and the ENFJs. Okay, let's start with this. So we have the ESTJs. What the E does, and anyone that has an E usually means that they're going to be acquiring information in their environment a lot more. They're going to be a lot more perceptive of the information in their environment, and there's less internalizing going on. It's more quantity, right? So the E is you like and you notice, and you can't help it that you are in your environment. Okay. The P versus the J is what do you do with that information in your head? So the P's tend to, and they tend to like perceive it and think about it and explore it, and be creative with it, and while the J's, they kind of get stuck in the information that they see and that they perceive, and they want to make sure it makes sense and make sure it's logical and make sure it's structured. So you have a ESTJ working in a hotel. They're picking up everything going on in the management. They're a manager, let's say, and they're picking up everything that's going in the hotel, right? They see everything. And they keep getting stuck on the information because they want the information to be accurate. And the information is not going to be accurate and not going to be structured, or it's going to be flawed. They're going to have this need and this desire and this importance to them to go ahead and change that information, change that system, and make sure it's working more efficiently. So it means firing someone if it means, hey, you gotta get your act together. You know, go to sleep better, but we need you at the shift. This hotel cannot manage without that. That's the difference between the J versus the P. Now, so we have the E and we have the J, but now what kind of information are you picking up? So you could be picking up F information or picking up T information, and obviously everything's a percentage and balance. So if you're picking up T information, it's thinking, so it really means a certain sense of logicalness, a certain sense of structure, efficiency. You know, the business has got to be managing properly, and so they're not necessarily focusing on the fact that, you know, Timothy over there is kind of hurt that she's getting more night shift hours than Samantha. They're more picking up on the fact that we need this system to be efficient, and that's why they can be a little bit colder, because they're not noticing and they're not picking up, and they don't care as much about the feelings as much, nor do they care about the overall establishment, the overall sense of structure that this thing that they're managing is going well. So an ESTJ, for example, will go to a restaurant, even if they're not managing it, and there's a flaw in how they're running the system, and it takes an hour for the food to come out, and the person working behind the counter keeps checking their phone. It's going to bother them. Why? Because they're picking up information in their environment. They're getting stuck on the fact that there's a lack of structure, getting stuck on the fact that the system is not being managed correctly, and they're going to want to change it. And they'll be like, let me speak to your manager. You know, if you really want to get this together, you have to, and you got to get her for phone. And they can't help it because it's so important to them. They keep getting caught that there has to be a certain sense of structure. That's why it's very important that these people work in these kind of fields where ESTJs can work in fields where they're able to, contribute in a way of things that are important to them. And what's important to them is that overall managing structure. As opposed to, we switch it for the F information that you're picking up, so you have the ESFJ. What's happening is you're taking in the information in your environment, but it's more of a feeling sense. You pick up feelings extremely well. Usually you're very sensitive yourself, and you could feel feelings yourself, so you're attuned to them and you understand them. That's just what your mind tends to notice, and you could be born that way, and very often you could be adapted that way to a certain degree. But so you're picking up all the feelings in your environment, and the J coming in, and when you gather that information from your environment, it comes in, and if it's flawed, your J comes in and you want to change it. So someone comes over to you and you see that they're really sad, and they tell you they need help. You really want to help them. You really want to J-itize and structure and fix and solve and manage. The feelings in your environment are doing okay. Like HR, very often, ESFJs will be working in HR where they're managing the feelings in their environment and making, you get your $25 paycheck for your birthday, and that you're okay, and then we have to make this change in the office, and your office hours are okay. All the ESTJs will very often be found as cops, for example, where they're managing systems and structures and enforcing rules and making sure the systems are working properly. And we need the ESTJs to do that, and we need the ESFJs to do that, to do their job. Okay. Now, just like the ESTJ will be bothered by if there's a flaw in the management, the ESFJs would be very bothered by if there is a flaw in how we're treating people. So ESFJs, if they see someone being abused, it would bother them very deeply, and they very often would speak their mind and go and let them know. Or if they see that like certain rules aren't fair to the clientele, all the EST, or to the workers, there, the ESTJs, won't bother them, as much from a feeling perspective. Like they'll be like, the ESFJs would from a feeling perspective would be like, they're working really, really hard, and it's important that they need more time off. While the ESTJ will be like, this company's at a point where we need people to be working harder, and it's so important that they put in these hours. And I know it's hard for them, but it's going to be okay. And maybe we'll give them extra benefits. So that would be a conversation difference you'd have between an ESTJ versus an ESFJ. Okay, so where does the S and N play a role? So it plays a role in two ways. So first of all, it plays a role that if you're more sensory, you're going to be more grounded in a certain sense, even though ESFJs aren't always so grounded, but more grounded, and you're going to see things a little bit more literally as is, and the rules are going to be more like not your creation. They're going to be more of enforcing what's already out there, so to speak. So for example, the ESTJ will manage the business, and what they'll do is they'll make sure everything's going smooth and everything's going okay. But when you change that S for an N, it all of a sudden adds like this kind of intuitive 3D spin on things, where you're able to kind of see it in a much more broad way, and you're able to think more outside of the box, where you start creating your own ideas more, and not just in terms of managing systems, but even thinking outside of the system, or you're opening a new branch and those kind of things. That's where the N would really kind of come in and play a role. And also what the N does is the N allows you to be able to, since you could see it more, the whole picture more, you might not get as caught up on specific things. So, take an ENFJ, and they see, somebody struggling with a certain level of feelings, and it bothers them, and they want to help them. But their intuition might allow them to be able to know, like, now is not necessarily the best time to talk to them, or, they might come up with a better approach at dealing with this, and their compassion would be much deeper, because their empathy, because they could understand the person much more. And while ESFJs very often will continuously give advice and try and change somebody they notice is struggling with feelings, because they really genuinely want to help them, and they kind of see things a little bit more structured as they are, as opposed to the same perspective. Now, same thing with the ESTJs versus the entjs. The N would see the system, and they're not just going to be the policemen, so to speak, where they're enforcing and they're managing. They'll be able to see things on a much more 3D dimension, and very often what they'll do is they'll be thinking about creating, or they'll be able to start their own company, as opposed to being the policemen. They'll go ahead and they'll start their own company, or they'll take the system that they have and they'll add dimensions to it, and they'll be able to understand the T in a much more 3D way. You could be an engineer, or you could be, as opposed to just being quote unquote the enforcers, and that's how the N plays a role. Now, the second thing that the S versus N plays a role in, and this has to do with functions, is the second function that all of these types are sharing: ESTJ, ESFJ, ENTJ, ENFJ. So let's go to the second function. So if you're an S in these four types, your second function is going to be called introverted sensing. Introverted sensing means that you kind of have this internal sense of like, what's worked, let's keep it. They'll like routine to a certain degree, they like a certain sense of like, let's maintain what's worked. Their advice very often and their ideas will very often be within a system where let's not go ahead and recreate the wheel, and that could very often and keep them much more secure. It's a sense of security, and they like that sense of security. Versus introverted intuition as a second function would mean like, I know what's work, what's not work, but I want to kind of like forget about the security. I want to like find my own identity in it, and that's why like you take like an ENFJs, they're really big travelers, because like they want to kind of like find their own system as opposed to their routine and what's work. They want to find their own system, their own routine. And very often people with introverted intuition, especially if it's their first function, can go ahead and create systems, their own systems, because that's important to them. So, you know, you take like the INTJ versus the ENTJ. The ENTJ is like the manager, you know, plus they add some stuff to the thing, and versus the INTJ is behind the scenes, who with the introverted intuition goes ahead and creates a system from scratch, because they don't just take on what's worked, they take on what's worked plus their intuition 3D perception of it to be able to then create something that's more, you know, within their identity, within what their intuition says, it's more unique, it's out of the box, out of the norm. So that basically explains the lives of ESTJ, ENTJ, ESFJ, ENFJs. That's a basic rundown, and you know, don't take this the wrong way if you're one of these types and you felt like it might have been insulting and that you're more secure or you're more this, because everything has its pros and cons. Like that security is very often in a way ends, could somehow get lost in life, and everyone adds their own way into the system of the world and keeping the world running. And also, if you're taking percentages, like percentages of S versus N and E versus I and all these things, you realize that everybody kind of has some sort of like, you know, somewhere on the drawing board where they have some sort of balance of all these things based on the percentages of their functions. So, but this just goes ahead and gives you like a certain sense of the system and the structure. So then you could go ahead and be like, oh, I know I do this, or I know I do that, and therefore you can kind of get a feel for your natural like position towards things, which then will be able to head in and see how you can adapt and manage, and you can kind of go ahead and really balance yourself out more. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. More to come.